Yeah, sure.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So we're very glad to have Dr. Ayșe Üskül here. She's a professor of social and cultural psychology at the University of Sussex in England. She's originally from Turkey, and she completed her PhD in psychology at York University in Canada. And she actually joined us here at the Department of Psychology for her postdoc between 2004 and 2006. So this is a bit of a homecoming for her. She works with Daphne Oysterman, Dikvitvet, and Shinobu.
Yeah.
Ayşe, yeah. Ayşe has written seminal papers on the socio-ecological roots of interdependence, examining differences in self-construals across herders and farmers, for instance. And the second focus of hers is on the cultural conceptions of honor, which is something she'll discuss today. And this is part of one of her most recent and largest projects to date, the Honor Logic Project, for which she is the main PI, in which she explores the role of honor across several Mediterranean societies. So Ayşe has received many awards, and I'll just mention two here, some of the most recent. So for her outstanding contributions to social psychology, she has earned this year's Mid-Career Award from the European Association of Social Psychology. And this coming year at SBSB, she'll be receiving the Genesis Shapiro Award for contributions to diversity and inclusion. She recently started her tenure also as co-chief editor of the European Review of Social Psychology and president of the psychology section of the British Science Association. So she's a very busy lady. Please welcome Ayşe Üskül.
Just gonna be. Can you hear me okay in the back? Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much for the warm welcoming introduction. It's really bizarre and lovely to be back after so many years. I managed to locate, with the help of some people in this room, the room without the window that I spent a 2-year postdoc, which were lovely years, and some of the familiar actually faces from those years are in the audience as well. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for the invitation. So as Catherine said, I've been working on this large-scale project, which started right before the pandemic, surprise, which of course got halted for a while, but then we managed to continue. Trying to really put some evidence from an understudied region of the world, the Mediterranean region, on the map of psychological knowledge. And having been inspired by Dick's work and Shinobu's work in the past, we decided to basically see where the Mediterranean region falls when it comes to their relationship, its relationship to East Asia and the West. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this, which is from a recently published piece, but I'm also going to talk about some new data where we're trying to map honor, face, and dignity logics across different world regions. So I'm happy to take questions as I go. So if there are any clarification questions, please do shout and I'll be happy to respond to them. Otherwise, I'm also happy to take questions at the end. Okay. So over the past 30 years, I think it's been very well established by now that there are a lot of differences between cultural contexts in how humans define themselves, how they process information, and how they relate to other individuals. And researchers have theorized that the daily practices and social institutions of different societies differentially incentivize independence or interdependence in how individuals engage in these processes, self-definition, relationships with others, and how they process information. And evidence for that cultural variability in these processes has come, as we all know, primarily from comparative work involving East Asian and Anglo-Western societies. And what we have learned from this research and this is a really very quick summary without going into details, is that members of East Asian societies tend to endorse a social orientation associated with things like harmony, relatedness, and connection, and to construe themselves as interdependent and embedded within social context, and to process information holistically. In contrast, members of Western societies tend to endorse a social orientation associated with self-direction and autonomy, to construe themselves as independent, defined primarily by internal attributes such as goals, desires, traits, and so on, and to process information analytically, for example, focusing on an object in a visual scene. And this body of research, of course, has been hugely influential in drawing our attention to both the importance and the underrepresentation of cultural diversity within the behavioral sciences, generally speaking. However, this binary approach has also made us, I think, assume that findings from East Asian contexts would generalize to other contexts around the world. Despite the fact that we actually have known very little about the variation within the rest in the non-Western world, which makes up the majority world. So we really wanted to go beyond this binary understanding of the world by introducing evidence from the Mediterranean region to address some of the assumptions that we have been making about individuals in other cultural contexts. So why did we choose to focus on the Mediterranean region? I think partly because Angela Leung and Dole Cohen introduced the idea of cultural logics, which gave us a theoretical framework to work with to potentially understand the Mediterranean region. So they introduced the idea of cultural logics, which they defined as coherent cultural constellations of shared beliefs, values, practices, and behaviors that are organized around a central theme, which then shape individuals' orientations on core psychological processes. So they distinguish between what they call cultural logics of honor, face, and dignity. And research accumulated so far, both in social psychology and anthropology, suggests that the cultural logic of face operates more heavily among East Asian societies, cultural logic of dignity in Anglo-Western societies, and cultural logic of honor in societies in Latin America, potentially in South Asia, in the Middle East, and around the Mediterranean. But what is important from our point of view is that this framework introduced and highlighted differences in the strategies that individuals might use to reach interdependence in face and honor regions. For example, they stated that individuals would do this through humility and deference in East Asian societies and through assertiveness and competitiveness in honor societies. This framework also refers to different sources of self-valuation. So it suggests that self-valuation is both external and internal in honor societies, whereas it's mostly external in face societies. So there are other differences that they list as well, but what is important is that it highlighted or it attracted our attention to potential differences within what we used to call this non-Western collectivistic world. So we also chose to focus on the Mediterranean region, where honor has been identified as a salient driver of social behavior in anthropological and social psychological studies. So we asked how interdependent members of honor cultures are and how they compare to members of face and dignity cultures. So this is a timely question, given the evidence that has started emerging in different parts of the world, including some of the amazing work that is done by Shinubu and his colleagues and students, where we have started learning that there might be different varieties of interdependence, different forms of it, or different levels of it. And you can see some of the papers that have introduced this diversity within the non-Western world when it comes to how interdependence is experienced and lived. So the questions we were asking we wanted to study them around the Mediterranean in relation to the US and the UK, so which we call as the Anglo-Western region, and Korea and Japan, which we call the East Asian face region. Just also because this was a novel region, it's understudied, we knew very little about it, so we wanted to anchor whatever evidence we were finding from this region within the existing literature. So we collected data in Spain, Italy, Greece, Turkey, Cyprus. In most studies, we have evidence data from both Turkish and Greek Cypriot communities in Cyprus, Lebanon, and Egypt. And also, why Mediterranean? Just to add a few more words to that choice. So Mediterranean is obviously a very heterogeneous region. So it hosts societies, cultural groups from different religious, ethnic, linguistic communities. And also honor entails both self and relationship focused features. So for example, when it comes to sources of self-valuation, which made us think that perhaps there's no monolithic pattern of self-view, social orientation, or cognitive style in this region. Maybe we'll find an interesting, distinct combination of both independent and interdependent features. And despite the fact that it hosts different types of groups, again, there's this anthropological and social psychological literature to suggest that there might be some similarities between these different ethnic, religious, and linguistic groups as well. So it was really an open question. What are we going to find? How does this region compare to what we already know, but what is also happening within the region? So we paid attention to both between region comparisons as well as within region comparisons. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit, first of all, about the social orientation, cognitive style, and self-construal measures that we had as part of one study. So we wanted to have a large battery of measures to make sure that any patterns that we observed would not be driven by task-related idiosyncrasies. So we included 6 actually, but I'm just going to focus on the 4 that are commonly used in the literature. 4 measures of social orientation, and these are considered to be implicit measures in the sense that people are not asked to rate any value item or attitude item, but they're doing tasks, and from the findings of those tasks, we're extracting information about their independent or interdependent social orientation. So one try to get at the propensity with which individuals experience socially engaged emotions. So in this one, there are 10 situations that people might have experienced in the past. And we're asking them what sorts of emotions they experience in each emotion. And some emotions were socially engaged. These were emotions that connected them with with other people in their relationships, such as feeling shame or feeling closeness to other people. And some emotions were socially disengaged, which disconnect people from their relationships, such as anger and pride. And we also calculated the extent to which socially engaged and disengaged emotions predicted participants' happiness. We also had a measure that focused on in-group bias. In this one, participants reported how close they feel to in-group members over out-group members. And we used this scale to calculate an in-group bias defined as whether they felt closer to members of in-groups over members of out-groups. Self-inflation, in this task, participants drew their social network by using circles to represent the self and their friends. And we measured if participants drew themselves bigger or smaller compared with the average size of the circles that they drew to represent their friends. So these are very commonly used tasks in the literature, and we did that on purpose to be able to compare our findings to what others have found in the past. And for those who don't know, based on the past literature, these tasks tell us that somebody has a strong interdependent orientation if they have a tendency to experience socially engaging over socially disengaging emotions more intensely, having their happiness predicted by socially engaged emotions, feeling closer to in-group members, and drawing others bigger than the self in a sociogram task. We also had 4 cognitive style measures, focusing on different aspects of our cognition, how we process information in our world. One focused on situational attribution bias. So this is whether we attribute the causes of events to situational factors or dispositional factors. We had a relationship-based categorization task where individuals decided which 2 out of 3 objects went together. So either, the chicken would go with the cow, that would be a category-based categorization, thematic, or the cow would eat the grass, so that would be a relational categorization. We also had a measure on inclusion of contextual information, and that was a task where participants saw lots of information about an event, and they had to make a decision as to which ones would be relevant to solving the problem in the event. So how many contextual factors are they taking into account? And the outside-in task asked participants to indicate the extent to which they tend to take a first-person perspective over a third-person perspective when they remembered past situations. And again, drawing on past findings, we took that a holistic cognitive style would be associated with taking into account a greater number of pieces of direct or circumstantial information, in causal attributions of a behavior, attributing causes of a behavior to situational factors over dispositional factors, categorizing objects on the basis of their relationships versus category memberships, and taking a third-person perspective over a third-person perspective. For some of you, this is going to be 101 cultural psychology, but I was told that not everybody is a psychologist in the audience. If I'm repeating for some of you, apologies. So I decided to spare you a bunch of bar graphs because we have lots of measures in this battery. So instead, I wanted to show you pairwise comparisons, starting with what we have been studying for a long time, and that is how East Asians compare to Anglo-Western participants. And as you can see with the salmon color indicating stronger interdependence, in 6 out of 8 measures, East Asians showed a stronger interdependent social orientation and holistic cognitive style compared to Anglo-Western participants. So that nicely replicates past work. When we look at the comparison between East Asian participants and Mediterranean participants, we see that East Asians showed a stronger tendency in social orientation and cognitive style in 4 out of 8 tasks compared to participants from the Mediterranean. And in fact, the Mediterranean participants were more similar to this is supposed to be stronger in independence here, so that's a mistake. So basically, in 2 out of 8 measures, the Mediterranean participants showed stronger interdependence compared to Anglo-Western participants, and 3 out of 8 Anglo-Western participants were more interdependent than Mediterranean participants, and in 3 out of 8 they were similar. So we don't really see a pattern here where the Mediterraneans are like the East Asians. So that's pretty clear. And moving on to how individuals define themselves, to investigate this, we used a multidimensional scale developed by Vignoles and colleagues. So this scale was developed cross-culturally and zooms into different ways that a person can be more independent or more interdependent in life, instead of just comparing overall levels of independence or interdependence. So it has 8 bipolar dimensions, which reflect different domains of functioning in life. For example, how the self is defined, how decisions are made, how conflicts are resolved, and so on. And what you see here are the ratings for these 8 self-construal dimensions across the 3 regions. So the more positive values indicate stronger interdependence, negative values indicate stronger independence, and 0 is no tendency either way. So overall, across 8 dimensions of explicit self-construal, members of Mediterranean societies showed largely an independent profile, both in absolute and relative terms. So they emphasize 6 forms of independence more strongly. So this is difference, self-direction, self-reliance, consistency, self-expression, and a decontextualized self. But they also emphasize 2 forms of interdependence more strongly, and that's connection to others and commitment to others in their self-ratings. And in all cases, significantly more so than East Asian societies, and in most cases, significantly more so than Anglo-Western societies. So basically what we see across this large battery of implicit and explicit tasks and measures is that East Asian samples are largely more interdependent than Anglo-Western samples. So we've known this for a long time, and we nicely replicate this in our data set. But East Asian samples are also largely more interdependent than Mediterranean samples. So that really shows us evidence for lack of a uniform pattern of interdependence across 2 regions of the majority world. So I wanted, as I said earlier, we were also interested in within region comparisons, because Mediterranean is a heterogeneous region. There are lots of different subgroups, and we grouped the different cultural groups that we had in our sample along ethnic, religious, linguistic, and geographical lines. So we had Latin Europe with Spain and Italy, Southeast Europe with Greece and Greek Cypriot community in Cyprus, and the Middle East. So the Turkey, Turkish Cypriot community, Lebanon, and Egypt. So what you see here is a forest plot with a gray line in the middle, which indicates no significant difference between comparison groups. The red dots represent the 2-way comparisons between the 3 Mediterranean subregions, so Latin Europe, Southeast Europe, and the Middle East. And the blue dots represent the 2-way comparisons between the 3 regions, the Mediterranean, East Asian, and the Anglo-West. So what we see here, and hopefully you can see it, the plot shows that a greater number of differences was significantly different from 0 for comparisons that involve the 3 major regions. So the blue dots are basically further apart from each other than the red dots, which means that the subgroups within the Mediterranean region were less differentiated from each other, i.e. they were more similar to each other when compared to the other comparisons between major regions. Right, so subgroups within the Mediterranean region are more similar to each other than they are to East Asian and Anglo-Western samples. Well, I just would like to stop here and just pause here and say, our goal here was not to create a Mediterranean identity or cultural identity around the region. I think anthropologists ditched that idea quite some time ago, but it was really trying to see where the Mediterranean findings fit in relation to what we have known, but also trying to understand whether there were any subgroup similarities, because the whole starting point was that this region is likely to endorse honor values or a cultural logic of honor. And is that actually making these subgroups similar to each other? Okay, so far I have presented mean level findings.
I have a question.
Sure.
It's not about your specific research, but something you just said. So feel free to punt on it. You said anthropologists gave up trying to profile the different subgroups a while ago. Was it just too much of a mess, or what led to the become part?
I think anthropology went through a kind of a self-critical phase, and they were operating within regional studies approach. And they were critical of that approach, or some were critical of that approach, because the data were actually coming from studies that focus on a particular subgroup within a country or even a village within an island, and they found it increasingly problematic, I think, to conclude something or extract information from that particular study about an entire region. Yeah, and I think, you know, it would be a wrong turn for us to start doing the same thing.
Actually, can I ask on that point? So, but a lot of our students are coming from college educated students in these countries. So is that the same critique apply?
Yeah, I mean, that is a valid critique. But I think given the purpose of this particular study, because all the previous studies pretty much came from college populations. So if I had data here that, you know, was coming from rural populations, it would be probably comparing apples and oranges. Given the purpose was to see how this region compares to other regions that we have known of, and that data is primarily student populations as well. But I will present non-student population data in a bit as well. So far I have presented mean level data, and that's something that we routinely do. And when we look at the data, we might actually say, well, look, Mediterraneans look even sometimes more independent than Anglo-Western samples. Where does this come from? What does it actually mean? So trying to get at the meaning of this and being inspired by one finding in the Arab paper that you published, Nabu, with your colleagues, where an independent aspect was primed, but it actually impacted an interdependent outcome. So we started thinking whether these seemingly independent characteristics might be actually in the service of relationships. And this was another question that we started out with, but we happen to have a well-being or life satisfaction measure in our study. And that had two items that tapped into social relationships. So we asked participants how satisfied they were with their personal relationships and feeling part of their community. So we took those two items out of the life satisfaction measure and tried to predict it with the self-construal dimensions that we had in the social orientation measures or tasks that we had. So feeling closer to in-group as opposed to out-group members, defining oneself as more connected to and dependent on others. So these are interdependent tendencies. So these predicted social well-being equally strongly across all regions. Okay, so the closer you feel to in-group members over out-group members, the more you connected to feel, the more dependent you feel. That's good for your social well-being. And one independent characteristic, which is defining yourself consistent across situations, also contributed to positively to social well-being, but again, across all three regions. So we did not find any different regional differences across these four indicators. We found that another interdependent tendency towards commitment to others predicted social well-being positively among participants from Mediterranean and East Asian regions. However, among participants from the Mediterranean region only, stronger independent tendencies towards self-direction and self-expression positively predicted social well-being, so did greater symbolic self-inflation. Okay, and this is, I think, quite unique because there are these three independent tendencies that seem to be in the service of social well-being or how you feel in relation to your social relationships. And what these findings seem to show is that social well-being in the Mediterranean region was predicted by a range of social and self-related indicators of interdependence as well as independence. But in contrast, for example, none of the indicators of independence emerged as a significant predictor of social well-being in East Asia, apart from consistency, which was across the board. That was the case for all regions. So that's quite an interesting difference. And arguably, this pattern might also be suggesting that independent ways of construing the self may have functions that support social inclusion and arguably interdependence. And I'll connect this to honor as well in a second. Did you have a question?
Yeah, was directionally, was there a linear relationship, Mediterranean, Anglo-West, East Asian on those three measures? But
in terms of mean levels?
Strength of the correlation.
Strength of the correlation.
Yeah, assuming those are correlations, yeah. I'm just wondering.
Between the indicators.
Yeah, was it Mediterranean on one and East Asian on the other and Anglo-West in the middle in terms of the predictiveness of self-expression, self-direction?
So, right. Well, in terms of significance levels, they did not significantly predict social well-being either in East Asia or Anglo-West.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we didn't look at the strengths.
It was a
You have a huge M, so.
Yeah,
Yeah, that means the now result is
It was
probably
meaningful.
yeah. I can't remember the strength of it, but yeah, it was not significant. Okay. So it is maybe important to start considering also what psychological needs particular forms of independence and interdependence may serve before categorizing regions based on mean levels alone. Okay, maybe independent region, but what does that independent actually do to your well-being or social relationships and inclusion and so on? Okay, and I also would like to, this is a bit far-fetched, but link it to what we know about honor. So I said at the beginning, yeah. No?
So I'm wondering, I think that measure has self-esteem or some views of positive views of self.
The life satisfaction measure?
Yeah. And I'm wondering
Yeah.
if you see, what patterns you see for these same variables. I'm a little surprised that there's not correlation in East Asia and Anglo-West. I'm just wondering if, you know, some of these are predicting self-esteem instead of social esteem or social well-being.
Right. So I'm just looking at the, yeah, I don't have all the items of the life satisfaction, but we could probably look at these, you know, self-esteem like items within the life satisfaction measure to see, you know, whether we can actually predict those items in relation to these indicators. We haven't done that, but we can do it.
Because it makes me a little skeptical of the indicator if we're not seeing what we would have expected for East Asia and Anglo-West. So if we do see what we expect for the self-esteem on,
Yeah.
then credibility to this measure or something.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good idea. We'll do that. All right, so just to trying to understand this finding within the context of honor. So I think the combination of independent and interdependent features and what they serve in terms of social well-being may appear to serve socio-relational functions that may be seen as consistent with portrayals of Mediterranean societies as characterized by a cultural logic of honor, because the cultural logic of honor really focuses on this idea of strength and positivity. So self-reliance, a bigger self, right? So there's this self component of it. But there's also a social component of it, how I see myself, whether I'm connected with other people, whether I'm committed to other people. So they seem, the regional, our understanding of the region as a culture of honor perhaps help us understand why we have this distinct combination of independent and interdependent features mattering when it comes to social well-being. But of course, so far I've been making assumptions about the Mediterranean region being an honor region. Right, so I mean, we have, of course, focused on existing research, but existing research is very patchwork research, including my own research, which compared Northern Americans with Turkish, or Patricia Rodriguez Mosquera's research that compared Dutch with the Spanish. So we really have, kind of a very focused understanding of honor, at least within social psychology in the Mediterranean region. And anthropological research really comes from the 60s and the 70s and what happened since then. So maybe they moved on from honor, maybe they don't value that anymore. So we really wanted to also map the cultural logics across the different regions that we studied in this project, asking, are Mediterranean, Anglo-Western, and East Asian regions characterized by different degrees of societal perceptions as well as personal endorsement of honor, faith, and dignity cultural logic? So that's an empirical question, which none of us really has looked at so far. But going one step ahead, we also wanted to understand whether cultural differences in these logics will help us understand the cultural differences that we have seen in social orientation and cognitive style that I presented earlier. So we measured honor the cultural logics in different ways, but it gets very complicated and messy if I present everything. So I'm just going to focus on the values. So we measure them as values and as concerns. But concerns, if you're interested, I can talk about it a little bit more. But for now, I'm going to talk about values. We basically ask people to indicate their agreement and disagreement with a bunch of value statements, trying to, focusing on honor values, face values, and dignity values. And you can see example items on the screen. And we ask participants to rate these items once for themselves, to what extent they agree or disagree. And once, in terms of how much they think most people in their society would agree or disagree with these items. So they're really trying to get at this intersubjective culture, which, as it is called by some researchers in the field. Okay, so I'm going to start with perceived societal values. So these are, this is the extent to which I think most people in my society think or endorse dignity, face, or honor values. So as one would expect, so the Anglo-Western participants said that most people in their society would endorse dignity values more, and that was significantly so compared to the other 4 regions. And East Asian participants actually said, that they perceive their society significantly weaker on societal endorsement of dignity values. Okay, and samples from the 3 Mediterranean regions kind of fell in between. When we look at face values, again, as expected, East Asian samples perceived the strongest societal endorsement of face. Either significantly or marginally significantly higher than all other regions, whereas differences in face values among the other 4 regions, there was no difference. So this is, again, I think the first time that we have seen that as measured in the form of values, we do replicate the expected pattern for Western and East Asian participants. So crucially, this is new. Participants from the MENA region, so these are the Turkish Cypriot, Lebanese, and Egyptian participants, are the ones that said that most people in my society would strongly endorse honor values, and significantly more so than the other 4 regions. They were followed by Southeastern Europeans and then Latin Europeans. But Latin Europeans, they did not differ from the Anglo-West.
But you also seem to have a bigger range for Mediterranean than for anybody else. Is that because there are more countries, do you think, or that it reflects some actual psychological variability?
Yes, so we have, I think, 4 groups for MENA, and 2 groups for Southeast Europe and 2 groups for Latin Europe. So we did this categorization based on other people's work that have categorized actually lots of different regions around the world along linguistic, religious, and ethnic lines. But when we actually dig deeper into the MENA region, we do see that they are more like each other, especially the North Africans. So the Lebanese and the Egyptians are, more tightly together, and the Turkish Cypriots and the Turks, they are more tightly together. But they're more like each other than they are similar to Greeks and Latin and Spanish samples. Yeah.
I love this graph. I think it's so interesting to just look at that East Asian difference along the 3 dimensions. Wild.
Yeah.
But aside from how much I love, a couple of questions. Anglo-Western, when you put up the map, it looked like that was like Texas, or where do those people come from?
Oh, they come from, so Susan Cross collected data at Iowa State.
Iowa State. Okay.
Yeah, so northern US.
So we would expect them to not be tremendously honor focused,
No.
or not somewhere in the.
Yeah, so we did not get it from the south.
Got it.
On
Okay.
purpose. Yeah.
So that'd be really incredible.
Yeah.
Right.
If that were the case.
Yeah.
And then the other question is just about the Luhmann-Cohen framework that this builds from. I'm not familiar with it. So are these 3 core values that we think culture distills up upon, or are they 3 important important values that we can begin to profile.
Yeah.
So just for my own sake, I'm not sure if there, like, are there other key ones that we should be looking at, or not you per se, but.
Yeah. So, I mean, they talk about cultural logics in terms of cultural constellations of behaviors, practices, values. So it's really this understanding that there is this core component that then shapes everything else, okay? And I think they don't say you should measure them as values, right? So you could look at different aspects of the cultural, socio-ecological environment that might be making up that whatever that core is, right? But we are also looking, as I said in this study, at dignity, faith, and honor as concerns, because you could be concerned about these things. You could be concerned about loss of honor, loss of dignity. So there are different ways in which you could operationally define this, but this is just one aspect of it.
So how did you answer those questions? That is, did you use the terms, words like dignity?
No.
Oh, okay.
So there are some examples here. Yeah. And so these actually, very interestingly, the factor analysis comes pretty clean, especially at the perceived societal level. So you could identify all these three, but the cleanest is the perceived societal, and I'll come to that. When you come to personal endorsement, it becomes a little bit messier. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. So this is the personal values. Personal endorsement of dignity values was mostly consistent with the pattern of perceived societal values. So again, you see the US endorsing dignity values most strongly. And East Asian samples also here, right? So they don't really endorse dignity values strongly at all, and they're at the bottom here. But interestingly, it was the MENA region samples that most strongly endorsed face values. It wasn't the East Asians. So here you see a discrepancy between the societally perceived societal values and the personal values. So these four groups did not differ from each other, but the MENA really value face at the personal level.
Do you think that's because they're young? Maybe older adults?
Yeah, I'll come to that in a second. So in honor, again, the MENA region says, well, I endorse honor very strongly. And again, these four groups did not differ from each other, but you see Asia is also a little bit closer to the MENA region than the other three regions.
So does this mean that being humble is an important part of being honorable? That is, honor means that people respect you for your ability. And if it's obvious that you are very competent, what's the point of saying that you are great? You can stay humble, and yet, if you look at me and say, oh, you're great, and my honor is preserved, and almost because of my humble attitude.
But what do you think of this, though? I mean, when I ask the same question, when it comes to your perceptions about your society, the East Asian says, well, most people value face, but I don't so much.
Yeah.
Right? So that's an interesting distinction.
Yeah, have you ever played's a bad word nowadays, but have you ever looked at the discrepancy between self-perceptions and societal as a measure of fit with the culture, and maybe as like a misfit that might have implications for well-being? And it's interesting to see some of those mismatches.
Yeah, we did. We have a fit paper, but we just looked at it within the Mediterranean region. So we looked at the exactly what you said. So the value, the extent to which I value honor, versus the extent to which I think most people in my society value honor. And the more fit, the better your well-being. But we didn't do that for face and dignity. Let me also just move on to study 2. So this is a study where we measured honor values in the larger population. I was talking earlier to some of you saying, I would never say representative because this was an online study and I don't think you can get representative samples using online samples in this region particularly, because there are still quite huge connection issues and device ownership issues and so on. But basically here we have a larger age range, the question you asked earlier, Catherine, and these are perceived societal values, and we see exactly the same pattern, right? So the Middle Eastern, I mean, also a lot of Turkish people would have a problem with being categorized as Middle Eastern, so I should also qualify that. But because they were Muslim and regionally closer to that area, we lumped them together with the other groups in that sub-region. But basically found that MENA samples again perceived stronger societal endorsement of honor values than did all other samples. And they're again close, not closely, but followed by Southeast Europeans and then by Latin Europeans. So when it comes to this here, personal values, again, we see that participants from the MENA region personally endorse honor values most strongly. And again, actually, the East Asians are closest to the MENA region when it comes to their personal honor value endorsement. So unfortunately, we did not have the face and dignity value measure in this study, so we only had the honor value measure. But this gives us some confidence that what the patterns we were observing in the previous study with student samples wasn't completely like an inaccurate or very biased representation of these societies. Okay. So basically what we try to do here is to map the prevalence of dignity, face, and honor values. And we find that there's relative importance of dignity in Anglo-Western context and the relative importance of face in East Asian context really come through in this data set. And honor values were most prevalent in samples located farther east and south within the Mediterranean region. And that really challenges the idea of a uniform honor culture in this particular Mediterranean sample. And there are sub-regional differences when it comes to honor endorsement, both at the perceived societal level as well as personal endorsement level. And cultural differences were more pronounced in societal perceptions of values in one society versus personal endorsement of these values. And I think there's an increasing interest and attention paid to intersubjective cultural approach. And it also seems to be meaningful approach to take in our study. And this also highlights, I think, the value of treating participants as cultural informants rather than prototypes of their cultural or exemplars of their cultural group. But again, remember, this is mean values, right? So we might be finding, for example, Latin samples not endorsing honor very strongly. But in my other research, I also find that regardless of you find differences or similarities in honor endorsement between two cultural groups, your predictions might still be very culturally specific. So in quite a few studies, when we looked at northern US and Turkey, for example, we don't always have cultural group differences in self-report honor values or honor endorsements. But when we look at then what these honor value scores do in relation to an outcome variable that we're investigating, then we see that honor actually predicts something in Turkey, but nothing, for example, in the US, in northern US. So I think, again, I'm putting this out there, but when it comes to what honor values, how strongly or how weakly you endorse actually does to your behavior and values and attitudes in life, that still needs to be, I think, considered separately. Okay, how am I doing with time?
Until 5. So 4:45, about 20 more minutes. A little over 20 minutes.
Over 20.
A bit over 20 minutes, yeah.
Okay, all right. So the next question that I'm going to share with you is whether perceived societal and personally endorsed values explain yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. If I'm following the logic correctly so far, it seems that one reason that the self-direction or independent values may predict relational well-being in honor cultures is because those values allow one to defend one's group's honor or one's family's honor. And so if that's true, I'm wondering if you might see that borne out by looking at the interaction
By
between
looking at?
the interaction between self-direction values or independent values and how much you value honor in predicting relational well-being, such that particularly for participants who really value honor and have an independent style that allows them to defend their group's honors,
Yeah.
They'd be particularly high in well-being.
Yeah, we have the data, we can do that. Yeah, we haven't done it. Yeah, we can definitely do it. I'm just thinking whether we have looked at it at all, but I don't think we have. That's right. I mean, we can look at it, you know, also we can look at the interaction with the sub-region as well, because we do know, for example, the MENA region endorses honors, you know, more strongly. So we can see whether the prediction is actually most, you know, much stronger in that sub-region compared to other regions, but we can also do it at the individual level.
Also, I kind of made a logical leap, so I also want to confirm.
Yeah.
Is that your intuition about why independent values might predict relational well-being in cultures?
Yeah. But yes, definitely. I'll get back to you on this once we have run the analysis. Thank you. Okay, just thinking, yes. Any other questions? Yeah.
Can I ask about the personal versus perceived measures and the
Yeah.
discrepancy there? I'm wondering if you think that's because people are inaccurate and they really don't know the values that other people hold, and they're kind of, they think that other people hold these more strongly than they actually do, or that they're thinking of a specific kind of prototypical person who might be an older person, you know, who had, where, you know, we might see more cultural differences among older cohorts, for instance. I'm just wondering if you can comment on the discrepancies there.
I think, you know, even as members of our own cultural group, we might hold certain stereotypes about our own cultural group. But we say most people, so we don't really say, I mean, I don't know what people they're thinking about when they're answering these questions, obviously, but we say most people. We don't say your cohort or your age group, or we don't say close others, right? So we're trying to most people in your society. So whatever that brings to your mind, then you're using that information to answer that question. And we're hoping that it would be the larger society. And if we had just done, you know, if we had just produced data from students, you would think, okay, maybe these are the younger people, they're the more modern people, more westernized people, who knows, right? So they're seeing their society in a particular way, but we replicate that in the second study where we had the samples drawn from the larger population, where we had comparable numbers of people from different age groups. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, it might be, perhaps when it comes to you, you might think that these are archaic values. I don't really necessarily endorse them myself. But here also, right? I mean, the where's that slide? I mean, here you see the men are both high on both, right? So it's not. So on both personal values and perceived societal values, Middle Easterners say we're all endorsing these, including me.
And it's seemingly still very meaningful because it's your representation of whatever the culture is.
Yeah.
So it's, so when I think, do I fit with this culture? That's the representation I'm anchoring on.
Yeah. Okay, so do these honor values in the ways that we measure them, as perceived, societal, and personally endorsed honor values, help us explain differences in social orientation and cognitive style? We haven't done the analysis for self-construal yet, so that's still to come, between samples from Mediterranean societies and Western and East Asian societies. Because so far, I think the interdependent self-construal has been kind of pushed upon us as well. What is the explanatory factor? What is the individual difference variable that helps us explain these cultural differences? But now we're trying to really understand these different self-related, social orientation-related attributes within the honor region context, or in relation to different cultural logics. So if they are meaningful, then they should help us understand some of these cultural differences. So you just have to take my word for it, because these are the analyses that we have recently run. So I haven't managed to produce fancy figures or tables, but basically what we're finding is that perceived societal honor values, not the personally endorsed values, explain group differences in tendencies to experience disengaging over engaging emotions. Remember, Mediterraneans were more likely to experience disengaging emotions over engaging emotions more intensely compared to the other two groups. Perceived societal honor values also help us explain this bias of remembering past situations from a third-person perspective rather than first-person perspective. And again, they help us explain group differences in making dispositional over situational attributions. Okay, so in 2 out of 3, and we had I think 8 or 10 we looked at, so not all of them are being explained by honor values, okay, but 3 out of 8 or 10, I can't remember now, we can explain. And the 2 are independent biases, right? So experiencing disengaging emotions over engaging and making dispositional over situational attributions. And one of them is an interdependent indicator. So it's, looking at yourself from the third person versus first person perspective. So honor doesn't help us explain only independent attributions. It also helps us understand an interdependent attribute. Not attribution, attribute. So again, I think it gives us a slight insight into what honor might be doing. It's not really turning us into this monolithic idea of either independence or interdependent, but it seems to be feeding into different attributes that are potentially helpful in that context. How could they be helpful? How could this be helpful? So think about disengaging emotions. So it's anger and pride. I mean, these are the emotions that we see in lots of honor-related studies. Aggression studies. You get angry. You engage in revengeful behavior. You can also be proud. That's the honor enhancing behaviors that we studied. For example, pride is an important construct there. And also perhaps by making dispositional over situational attributions, again, you're seeing yourself as an important agent, or the person as an important agent that has some sort of impact over his or her environment. And this seeing yourself, having the tendency to see yourself from a third over first person perspective might help you navigate your social image. How am I being perceived by other people, which is also in service. Would be in service of good behavior in an honor context. So perhaps honor really feeds into some of these independent and interdependent attributes to the extent that these attributes are meaningful within that context. But I think this is the first time where we're actually looking at honor as an explanatory variable in understanding this cultural variation in some of these processes between Mediterranean versus East Asian and Western contexts.
Do you think it's possible that personal value of dignity rather than social perceived value of dignity? That is, your perception of kind of dignity is a dignity. That is, what is dignity? Basically, it's your own conception of me this way or that way, right? Yeah. Being consistent, being X and Y. Now, honor is essentially very, kind of social how other people may be seeing me as X and Y.
Mm.
So I'm wondering if that might be part of the story behind this, that is a social perception of honor, or a social value of honor is more predictive of something. But now in the case of dignity, I'm curious if personal side might have greater explanatory power.
Yeah. We can again look at this.
Yeah, yeah.
However, when you look at some of the research that has taken into subjective culture into account, they actually find that what you think the social norms are, or what other people agree, or what they think can be at times a better predictor of your own attitudes, values.
Yeah,
and
usually self-construal never predict anything.
because the way you measure it, I think, yeah. But I mean, not you measure it, but the scales that we have been using, maybe not, they're not getting at the core of this construct, because it is so messy and multidimensional. But yeah, we can look at this. Is it really your endorsement when it comes to dignity that matters, and for honor, maybe it is the societal perceptions that matter more. Okay, so 10 minutes left or so. Okay, so Mediterranean region seems to have this unique combination of independent and interdependent tendencies. And studying honor also seems to help us make sense of some of the cultural variation, at least in these some particular psychological tendencies. So it is perhaps another explanatory variable that we can focus on, especially when we're doing research in certain world regions. And cultural environments and logics can foster ways of being, relating, and behaving that are culturally specific and meaningful. But I would like to, this is kind of the end slide, but there are other slides that I would like to touch upon, because I didn't know what my speed would be. But the last thing in this part of the talk, I would like to emphasize, basically we need to be cautious, I think, against developing and relying on new clear-cut categories to describe cultural variations. So there's no one monolithic way of understanding independence or interdependence. In some regions, these two forces might be operating together, serving different needs. So we really need to try to also look at within region differences. I mean, as we have seen, Latin Europeans are very different to, for example, the other groups around the Mediterranean. So it's great. I'm going to thank the group later on. I'm just going to jump to another interesting finding, which was in the additional slides that I have here. So basically, just look at the top one, because I didn't talk about concerns, but this basically tells us the hugely strong correlations between men and women when it comes to their honor value ratings. And honor, especially, is a very gendered construct, right? So I mean, the endorsement, both this is a societal, and the next one is personal. So so this is from the larger population study. Huge correlation, so around 0.8, 0.9. And I haven't talked about these, but we also had societal concerns, so concerns about losing dignity, losing face, and so on. So there are different factors that emerged. And again, even loss of sexual propriety, loss of family authority, you would think, well, these would be very gendered constructs, right? Even there, we find men and women responding very similarly to what they think the most people in their society would endorse, right? So these are the perceived societal concerns and perceived societal values. So this is something that has really surprised us. We did not expect this, something to take into account. The other thing that I would like to highlight when it comes to concerns, and this is really, I mean, it speaks to the messiness of this construct of honor. You can measure it in different ways. You can measure it as values, as concerns. It has lots of different ways of measuring it. But again, I think speaking to similarities and differences between different regions when it comes to different facets or dimensions of honor, look at this. The Mediterraneans and the East Asians are very similar when it comes to loss of sexual propriety concerns, for example, and that's been considered to be one of the important aspects of honor concerns in the literature. So, I mean, that is, I think, a lesson for us. I mean, for me, especially, to think about what aspect of honor I am going to study and which regions I am going to study. So this is really a lesson for me that I have learned from this research. There's no one way in which we can say, okay, this is an honor region. They endorse all of it in the same way. No, they don't. So it might be very, for example, interesting to sample groups from East Asia and MENA region when we are studying sexual propriety, as opposed to, for example, other regions. Our comparison groups might be changing depending on what aspect of honor we're talking about. And the same maybe goes for independence and interdependence. Maybe we haven't taken the multidimensionality of those constructs as much as we should have. And depending on what aspect of those constructs we're focusing on, our comparison groups might also change. Which samples are we going to, or which populations are we going to sample from to find the strongest differences, strongest similarities? So yeah. Let's see if there's anything else that I put here that I might have. Should I talk about this as well? Do we have time for questions at all, or I can leave? I mean,
Well, I think people will ask lots of questions.
Yeah, I think we should.
Yeah.
Let's talk to you.
should I talk more?
It's up to you.
I mean, we could ask you questions.
Yeah, okay, questions.
Yeah.
That's better.
Let's give you a break.
Yeah. Okay, so I will basically then finish by thanking this amazing group of people that we have been working together. These are collaborators from all these different regions, and it's been a wonderful group, who just made this happen.
Oh, do you work with Tinkham?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, through the pandemic, it's been just amazing. We all have a huge ownership of this project, and they just have made it happen. So I'm really grateful and really happy to be part of this group. And thank you for listening.
So I have a kind of interesting mixed feeling.
Okay.
So Dick defined this is interdependence, this is analytic sort, and I define some, and maybe somebody else like Hazel did that. So there's a kind of list of attributes that define independence or analytic mode of forward. And here's a list of things which define, right, interdependence or holism. And so that's very self-affirming for me. Basically, it seems like we are right. Right? Now, however, when I look into the data like this, or when I looked at my own data from Arab region, basically, starting with that assumption, you have to conclude that Arabs are independent in some respects. Self is there, for example. Right? Now, you might wonder if Dale or Elizabeth or Marcus were right. They might have been wrong as applies to Arab regions. So I'm presenting two potential scenarios of interpretation, right? You can start with this kind of a most primordial, older people used to be saying and say, okay, this is a canonical definition of independence or interdependence. Using this scale, then, well, Arabs must be very independent in some respects.
In some respects.
Yeah, in some respects.
Yeah.
Right? So you can say that, but you are a little bit more skeptical and kind of a rebellion against authority. That is me. In the sense, you can say, okay, actually, you know, right, those people must have been wrong, you know, just that they studied East and the West. And in that context, probably it's right that, you know, smallest self is associated with interdependence. However, in Arab context, maybe big self is interpreted in such a way that it is more properly understood as part of the interdependence as they envision, not East Asian or Western as that. So, well, I think your kind of hypothesis is based on the first story. But I'm curious what you might think about the second possibility. That is, you know, there's kind of categorization of different attributes into independence and interdependence based on East-West research. Maybe confines to East-West, just leave it there. And the same set of attributes could carry different meanings in different contexts, maybe Arab, maybe Mediterranean, maybe Latin America. And well, hopefully eventually this is the empirical question. But still, it seems to me it's useful to think about, you know, kind of a interpretive game. You know, interpretation can stick to the original conceptualization, or you can open things up a bit and say, okay, you know, Marcus and Kitayama and Nisbet and everybody may have been wrong in some important respects, as applied to other places.
I don't, did you want to say something before I respond, or?
Yeah, it's pretty related.
Yeah, sure, go ahead. Yeah.
So I'm just thinking, I had a similar thought. So maybe instead of defining independent and interdependence according to the traditional conceptualization, you define it according to the function that a particular trait serves. So even though something's been traditionally defined as independent, it ultimately serves an honor function, therefore leads to greater relational well-being, then fundamentally, it's within interdependence.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I mean, I've never approached this as who's right, who's wrong. First of all, this really shows that this is an incredibly useful theoretical framework to work with, right? Which is quite flexible in helping us understand how individuals define themselves and relate to others and process information in different world regions. So I find that extremely useful. So you really provided, Hazel, you and Dick, an extremely useful theoretical framework for us to work with. It might be the case, indeed, that maybe these seemingly independent characteristics serve relational functions, but it also makes me think perhaps the individual is really embedded within social relationships to such an extent that whatever happens to that individual has direct social and relational consequences. So in a way, the enmeshedness of individual with its group and close relationships perhaps is actually stronger in those contexts and perhaps in East Asia. We don't know. I mean, we're just scratching the surface here, really. I mean, we happen to have a social well-being, 2 items that we predicted with whatever measure we had. So there's way more to be done in that respect. But I think because honor is such a construct where the individual takes care. I mean, the original roots of honor cultures, right? So there's low, you know, law enforcement, weak law enforcement, portable wealth, and there's usually the man who's out there as an individual that protects the family, prevents you know, the family being threatened by other forces and so on. So it's really a lot going on for the individual to be done for the collective. So in a way, it is a very collectivistic understanding where the individual is actually very strong. So it may sound a little bit confusing, but it just all makes sense, I think. The other issue that, I mean, you know, Dov and Dick highlighted a lot is that it is important for the individual to signal, communicate a self and social image to others to shape future relationships, like how others are going to treat me, whether they're going to mess with me or not, depends on how I behave at this very moment, whether I get back at the aggressive, or honor threats, or do I respond with aggression or withdraw or just say nothing? So rather than a social unit, really the individual is in the service of protecting so many other things, social links, the family, the children, the woman, the house, the cattle, whatever that might be, right? So I don't really see this in any way contradictory. I think it is just that we haven't looked at these constructs in other world regions to make different sense of them. And that's really one of the purposes of this project. So to push this agenda ahead, as well as diversify the psychological science. But it's really making us, and that really originated with the Arab paper that you had, which made us think, okay, what is happening here? An independent prime is in the service of an interdependent outcome. What is really happening? So you're the one who challenged yourself to begin with, and then I just followed your path.
Yeah, that's right. I remember, when we first did social welfare in Saudi Arabia,
Yeah.
fully anticipating that their self must be small.
Yeah.
And just I was astonished that their self is big,
Yeah.
bigger than American self. And that's just ridiculous, right? Now it's not, because, data is data, so it's not ridiculous, but also theoretically, they endorse honor.
Yeah.
And big self is absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
To perform honor. Right, so that's what you are. So in Alvaro's paper, we essentially primed interdependence.
Yeah.
And interdependence prime enlarged the self.
Oh, okay. So it was the other way around.
Yeah.
I misremembered. Yeah.
So we used it to assert that maybe this big self has a social function for sure.
Yeah.
And maybe we might have been wrong in assuming that big self is inherently connected to individualism.
Well, in the West, it is.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
In the US,
Yeah.
independence prime enlarged the self.
Yeah.
So, that's what I'm saying. That is, in East-West context, that measure means one thing.
Mhm.
But I have no need to apologize for this, because
It is what
that's
you
all we
found.
do.
Yeah.
But now, people go to Saudi Arabia or somewhere and showing contradictory data.
Mhm.
So one interpretation is to stick to the original interpretation and say, okay, Saudis are independent in some respects.
Mhm.
Another interpreted possibility is to say, okay, big self can mean different things
Mhm.
in different contexts. Maybe that's a semantic endeavor. But I seem to me that there's more to just semantics. So
Mhm.
I appreciate that.
But the other related finding that you have shown, and we also find in this data set, is that at the individual level, these different measures of social orientation, self-control, less, but cognitive style, they hardly correlate.
No,
Right. So there are we already know from your studies that there's no one way in which people are independent or interdependent, which then leads into all sorts of characteristics that they.
Oh, yeah, so actually, that
endorse.
finding is very consistent with that assumption that independence can mean many different things for different individuals, as well as for different cultural groups.
Yeah, but that's a little bit, if you extract that finding to the cultural, so to another level, maybe independence also means something else, right? For different people, for different cultural groups. So independence means having a bigger self in the West, but maybe interdependence means having a bigger self in the Middle East.
Once you start doing it, things look so chaotic, so, you know, it's too messy, you can say that.
But I think we've kept it pretty clean for a very long time. Let's get it messy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder another way to look at this would be to look at the intercorrelations between the interdependent and independent traits. So if in a particular context, such as the honor context, you find a high correlation between what are traditionally thought of as interdependent traits with what are traditionally thought of as independent traits, then that would suggest that they're kind of forming some sort of cluster.
I remember looking at this, you know, at the individual level, but I don't remember breaking it down by region. So we can do that. But my recollection is that it was pretty, the correlations were pretty low. So I would be surprised if it was higher in honor region and lower in the other two regions. Because across the board, they were pretty low at the individual level. At the cultural level, they correlate, which is again the typical finding that Shinobu shows. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't think it would be all independent traits that correlate with all interdependent traits, but rather, you know, some subgroups.
Yeah, subgroup.
Some
Yeah,
sort of relational well-being.
yeah, we can look at that again. Yeah, thank you. You gave us lots of ideas. Yeah, Catherine, you had a question?
Yeah, so just to extend what Shani was just asking, wondering about, you know, we have this list, this list of 11 or so measures that have been used and been built on East-West comparisons, built by and for East-West comparisons.
Yeah.
Populations. And I'm wondering, you know, is it time to extend this list and to build measures that would more accurately or better, you know, distinguish between West and Mediterranean societies, and what would those measures be? Because you have, you know, of your list of looking at these pairwise comparisons here, there's 3 that correlate, 4 that don't, or, you know, some traits, but that's just a fraction of the possible measures or constructs that could be measured.
Yeah.
So maybe that whole calculus would shift if we had a longer list, and particularly measures that were built for that Mediterranean West comparison. And I'm wondering, you know, maybe that'd be like responses to threat, or looking at this difference between what other people think versus you think. I guess my first question is, do you think that's possible? And then second, what kind of measures with those can you imagine this being?
Yeah. So just self-defense, we chose these measures just to be able to make comparisons, right, with what we know. So I think that was the initial step, like to really situate this region in relation to what we know. And yes, I mean, we should make this list of constructs to be studied larger. I think one aspect that these measures are not covering is group-specific measures. I have a hunch that family is really important. So when it comes to, because we say in-group closeness, right, out-group closeness, I mean, these are pretty abstract. Well, not abstracts. I mean, we basically in-group closeness brought together different items in iOS, which was family, close, others, friends, I think, is kind of a combination of different items. But maybe looking at how people relate to others or how they define themselves in specific group contexts. I think that's something that would be really worth looking at. You know, national context, family context, tribal context, right? So some of these patterns might then start changing. In terms of other interesting characteristics, well, we mentioned this today, promotion, prevention oriented. So the other thing we found in our research on honor, for example, when you ask individuals to generate situations that would promote their honor or enhance their honor or threaten their honor or somebody else's honor. So what situations would threaten honor or enhance honor? So for the enhancement of honor, participants from honor cultures generate more prevention-focused situations. So what would enhance your honor? Not to do X, not to do Y, right? So that's to me a very prevention-focused way of thinking about honor. It's not, you're not doing something to maintain it or enhance it, but you're actually, shying away from engaging in certain behaviors. But when it comes to threatening, it was more active. So you would do something to somebody else. So I think that component is completely understudied, which would be helpful also when it comes to understanding threats behavior. So, what do you do to protect yourself from threats, in-group threats, environmental threats, interpersonal threats? Do you engage in promotion behaviors or prevention behaviors, for example? The other thing is also diving a little bit more into, and I didn't talk much about it today, but these different aspects of honor. It's really, as I said, very complicated construct to study. It has different facets to it, but integrity, for example, is a component of honor. And we know very little about it. And we don't usually see cultural differences in integrity, but in its conceptualization of the construct of honor, it is part of that. Feminine, masculine honor, also studying honor as an ideology, concern, or value. Do we then get different results? Do you have any suggestions as to what else might be added to the list?
I was just thinking my own work that I find that peacefulness is highly predictive of behavior and of well-being.
Yeah.
And is almost never measured.
Peacefulness.
Peacefulness.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's something that I would.
Yeah. Good luck measuring that in Middle East. Yeah.
It's mostly about.
Yeah. I get that. Yeah. No, it would be great to collectively, increase the list of measures and.
Well, thank you
so
much, Ayşe.
Thank you very much.